8 years ago, I started a tech company in my parents' garage with 3 employees and a business plan written on napkins. Today, that company is worth $50 million, employs 200 people, and just went public last month. But none of that mattered at Thanksgiving dinner when my father stood up in the boardroom I'd designed, raised his wine glass, and announced to 40 family members that he was handing the company over to my brother Daniel. Daniel, who'd spent the last 8 years finding himself backpacking through Europe while I was pulling 18-hour days, missing weddings and funerals and birthdays to build something extraordinary. Who'd never attended a single board meeting, never closed a single deal, never even asked about the business until he heard we'd gone public. "This company needs strong male leadership," Dad said, his voice carrying across the room where I'd pitched to investors, hired our first employees, and turned his garage startup into an empire. "Daniel has the vision to take us to the next level." The applause was deafening. Relatives who'd watched me sacrifice everything for 8 years were cheering for the golden son who'd contributed nothing but chromosome configuration to this moment. I sat there in the chair where I'd made million-dollar decisions, listening to my life's work being handed to someone whose biggest accomplishment was learning to make pasta in Italy. My name is Lillian Hall. I'm 36 now, but this story starts when I was 24, young enough to believe that hard work actually mattered, naive enough to think my parents would notice if I bled for their approval. Picture this. A cramped Queens apartment, 2011. My brother Daniel's acceptance letter to Oxford sits on the kitchen counter like a golden ticket, while I'm hunched over a second-hand Dell laptop with 3 dead pixels and a battery that dies every 47 minutes. The apartment reeks of burnt coffee and broken dreams, the same smell that had followed my parents through 2 decades of living paycheck to paycheck. Daniel's suitcase sits by the door, stuffed with clothes I'd helped buy from my community college savings. 8 years, he announces, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. Business degree, then maybe law school. Maybe I'll stay for a master's. Europe's calling. Europe was calling, all right. With my family's last $3,000 as the down payment. Someone needs to stay and help Mom and Dad, I say, closing my laptop. The screen flickers once before going black, just like my college plans. "That's what you're good at, Lil," Daniel says, not even looking up from his passport. "You're the responsible one." Responsible, the family word for the one who cleans up everyone else's mess. While Daniel was sipping wine in Tuscany and posting Instagram photos from London libraries, I was learning what real hunger felt like. Not the college student kind where you eat ramen for a week, the kind where you stand in the cereal aisle at Key Food calculating whether you can afford milk and the box of Cheerios. That laptop became my weapon of choice. I started freelancing web design from Mom's kitchen table, the same wobbly piece of furniture where we'd eaten government cheese and discussed which bills could wait another month. Every client was a lifeline. Every project was proof that maybe, just maybe, I could build something bigger than the financial quicksand we'd been drowning in for years. The first breakthrough came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March 2012. I'd been surviving on gas station coffee and determination when this small manufacturing company in Newark needed their entire digital infrastructure rebuilt. The owner, a gruff man named Tony Castellano, offered me 3 times my usual rate if I could deliver in 2 weeks. I didn't sleep for 13 days straight. My hands shook from caffeine overdose. My vision blurred from staring at code until sunrise. But I delivered that project like my life depended on it, because it did. That single contract became the seed money for what would eventually become Hall Digital Solutions. By 2013, I'd moved operations to a basement in Astoria. Concrete walls, fluorescent lighting that buzzed like angry wasps, and 2 metal folding chairs that left permanent indentations on my spine. The space flooded every time it rained hard, and the heating system consisted of 3 space heaters from Home Depot that tripped the circuit breaker if I ran them simultaneously. But it was mine. I hired my first employee, Sarah, a graphic designer who was just as hungry and just as desperate as I was. We worked 16-hour days, survived on dollar pizza and shared dreams, and slowly started winning contracts that mattered. Each new client meant I could afford another employee, another computer, another step away from the poverty that had defined my childhood. The sacrifices weren't romantic. They were brutal. I lived on the office couch for 8 months to save on rent. I missed my best friend's wedding because I couldn't afford both the gift and the train ticket to Philadelphia. I dated exactly 3 people in 5 years, and each relationship ended the same way, with someone telling me I cared more about my business than about them. They were right. Christmas 2015. While Daniel posted photos from a ski resort in Switzerland, I was in the office Christmas morning, alone, fixing a server crash for a client who threatened to sue if their website stayed down. I ate Chinese takeout from the container, crying into lo mein while debugging code that someone else would get credit for. But the company kept growing. 10 employees became 25. 25 became 50. We moved from the flooded basement to actual office space in Long Island City, windows that let in real sunlight, conference rooms with tables that didn't wobble, employee bathrooms that didn't double as storage closets. By 2017, Hall Digital Solutions had contracts in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. We were handling million-dollar accounts, employing over 100 people, generating revenue that would have seemed impossible from that kitchen table where this all started. I thought I was proving myself. Every late night, every missed holiday, every relationship I sacrificed on the altar of success, I thought it was building towards something my parents would finally recognize. Some moment when they'd look at me the way they looked at Daniel's graduation photos, with pride instead of obligation. The irony is devastating now. While I was killing myself to build an empire, they were just waiting for their real heir to return from his European vacation. I wasn't building my legacy. I was keeping Daniel's throne warm. 8 years of my life, reduced to a placeholder. 8 years of believing that if I just worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, bled enough, they'd finally see me as more than the family cleanup crew. The worst part? Part of me is still proud of what I built. Even knowing how it ends, even knowing what they took from me, I look at those 100 employees, those multi-million-dollar contracts, that empire I created from nothing, and I can't regret the work. I only regret believing that any of it would ever belong to me. November 28, 2019, Thanksgiving at the Hall family compound, except we weren't gathered around Mom's old kitchen table. We were seated at the 40-foot mahogany conference table I'd commissioned for our executive boardroom, the one that cost more than my parents' annual income back when I was sleeping on their couch. The irony wasn't lost on me. We were celebrating family in the building I'd constructed from 16-hour days and sheer bloody determination. Daniel sat to Dad's right, looking like he belonged there. 8 years in Europe had given him that polished veneer that money can't buy but privilege can rent. His suit was tailored in Milan, his watch worth more than most people's cars, his confidence built on a foundation he'd never had to lay himself. 23 family members filled leather chairs around that table. Aunts, uncles, cousins who'd shown up for turkey and stayed for what they sensed was going to be a show. The crystal chandelier I'd personally selected cast warm light over faces I'd known my entire life, people who'd watched me transform from the responsible daughter into the woman who'd saved their family from financial ruin. Dad stood up, his champagne flute catching the light like a weapon. The room fell silent with that particular hush that precedes life-altering announcements. We gather tonight not just as family, but as witnesses to something historic. His voice carried the authority of someone who'd never doubted his right to make decisions about other people's lives. 8 years ago, when Daniel left for his education abroad, Lillian stepped up to keep our family business running. My heart started hammering against my ribs. Something in his tone, the way he said stepped up, like I'd been covering someone else's shift at a convenience store instead of building an empire from nothing. She's done admirable work. He paused, letting that word hang in the air like a noose. Admirable, not exceptional, not groundbreaking. Admirable, the kind of word you use to describe a child's finger painting before you throw it away. But now Daniel has returned with the education, the vision, and the leadership skills necessary to take this company into the future. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. Every sound in the room, the gentle clink of silverware, the whisper of fabric against leather, the hum of the HVAC system I'd had installed, suddenly seemed amplified to a deafening roar. Effective immediately, Daniel Hall will assume the role of Chief Executive Officer of Hall Digital Solutions. The applause started with Mom. Her hands came together in sharp, decisive claps that echoed off the windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline I'd worked 18-hour days to afford. The sound spread around the table like wildfire, 23 pairs of hands celebrating the erasure of 8 years of my life. My fork froze halfway to my mouth, a piece of turkey that suddenly tasted like sawdust balanced on the silver tines. The walls I'd painted, the floors I'd chosen, the very air I was breathing, all of it belonged to someone else now. Had always belonged to someone else, apparently. Daniel raised his own glass, that smile spreading across his face like oil on water. I want to thank my sister for keeping the lights on while I was getting the education necessary to run a real business. Keeping the lights on. 8 years of sacrifice, of missing every holiday, every birthday, every moment of joy that normal people take for granted, reduced to keeping the lights on. Lillian's always been good at the day-to-day operations, he continued, his voice carrying that casual dismissal that only comes from a lifetime of having your path cleared by other people's sacrifices. But this company needs strategic vision now. It needs someone who understands global markets, international finance, the kind of big-picture thinking they don't teach in community college. Community college. He said it like a slur, like those 2 years I'd managed between working 3 jobs were somehow shameful compared to his 8-year European vacation funded by my blood and sweat. The room erupted in more applause, more congratulations, more celebration of my professional execution. I watched my own employees, people I'd hired, trained, mentored through their worst days, clapping for the man who would now sign their paychecks. Of course, we'll find an appropriate role for Lillian in the new structure, Dad added, like he was doing me a favor, perhaps heading up customer service, or managing our smaller accounts. Something that matches her. Skill set. Customer service. After building a multi-million-dollar company from nothing, they wanted to put me in charge of handling complaints about late deliveries. That's when I understood with crystal clarity what I'd been to them all along. Not their daughter. Not their partner in building something meaningful. I'd been their placeholder. A warm body to occupy the CEO chair until the real heir finished his European education and was ready to claim his birthright. I set my fork down with surgical precision, the tiny clink of silver against porcelain somehow louder than all the celebration around me. My hands were steady, which surprised me. Inside, I was screaming loud enough to shatter every window in the building, but my hands didn't shake. "Congratulations, Daniel," I said, my voice carrying across the room with perfect calm. "I'm sure you'll do great things with the company I built." The emphasis on "I built" was subtle but unmistakable. A few heads turned my way, uncertainty flickering in eyes that had been bright with celebration moments before. Daniel's smile faltered for just a second, long enough for me to see he knew exactly what he'd stolen. Long enough for me to understand that this wasn't oversight or favoritism or even garden-variety sexism. This was deliberate. This was calculated. This was a family deciding that 8 years of one daughter's life was an acceptable price to pay for one son's convenience. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of congratulations and strategic planning discussions I was no longer invited to join. I sat there, pushing food around my plate, listening to my family discuss the future of my company like I wasn't even in the room. After dessert, after the last toast to Daniel's vision for the future, after the family started filing out to their cars in the parking garage I'd had built, I found myself alone in the building that had been my life's work. The silence was deafening. These hallways that used to pulse with the energy of 100 employees working towards something meaningful now felt like a mausoleum. Every door I passed held memories of battles fought, victories won, crises weathered through sheer determination and caffeine-fueled all-nighters. I walked to my office, former office, and ran my fingers along the window that overlooked the city I'd conquered one contract at a time. The glass was cold against my palm, reflecting my face back like a ghost haunting the ruins of her own life. This place that had been my sanctuary, my temple, my proof that hard work could transcend the circumstances of your birth, it was never mine. The name on the door, the title on my business cards, the respect I'd earned through bleeding for every success, all of it was temporary. All of it was borrowed time until the real owner came home. I pressed my forehead against that window and whispered the words that changed everything. "This place is no longer mine, but that doesn't mean it has to be yours." 8 years they'd stolen from me. 8 years of believing that merit mattered more than DNA, that sacrifice would be rewarded with recognition, that building an empire would earn me the right to rule it. They'd made one critical miscalculation. They thought I'd built this company for them. I'd actually built it for me. And I was about to remind them exactly what that meant. December 2nd, 2019, 4 days after Thanksgiving, 4 days after watching my life's work get handed to someone who'd spent 8 years perfecting his tan in European cafes. I walked out of Hall Digital Solutions carrying nothing but a cardboard box containing a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Boss," a gag gift from my assistant 2 Christmases ago, and a succulent plant I'd kept alive through 3 office moves and countless all-nighters. My resignation letter was 3 sentences long: professional, clean, final. Effective immediately, I am resigning from my position at Hall Digital Solutions. I wish the company success under its new leadership. Sincerely, Lillian Hall. What I didn't write was the real message. You just made the biggest mistake of your lives. Standing on the sidewalk outside the building I'd constructed from 16-hour days and sheer bloody will, holding that pathetic cardboard box like it contained the remnants of my dignity, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 8 years. Freedom. Not the romantic kind they write songs about. This was the raw, terrifying freedom that comes when you realize you have absolutely nothing left to lose. When the safety net you'd been clinging to gets ripped away, and you discover you'd rather fall than keep pretending it was ever really there. My phone buzzed with texts from employees asking if the rumors were true. Had I really quit? Was I really walking away from everything I'd built? The messages kept coming. Programmers, designers, account managers, people I'd hired and trained and watched grow from nervous college grads into professionals who could handle million-dollar accounts. I turned my phone off. Some conversations required more than 160 characters. The apartment I rented that night was a studio in Astoria, 400 square feet above a Korean BBQ restaurant that filled the building with the smell of grilled meat and ambition every evening. 1 room, 1 window, 1 chance to prove that 8 years of sacrifice hadn't been for nothing. The office came next. 3rd floor above Suds and Spin Laundromat on Northern Boulevard. A space so small you could touch both walls if you stretched your arms wide. The previous tenant had been a tax preparation service that went bankrupt after the owner got arrested for fraud. The carpet still had stains from where the FBI had spilled coffee during the raid. 4 folding chairs from Home Depot. 1 desk assembled from IKEA parts with an Allen wrench I'd borrowed from the laundromat downstairs. A single fluorescent bulb that flickered whenever trucks drove by, casting shadows that danced like ghosts of better days. The sign painter charged me $200 for the words on the window. Hall & Co. Solutions, the & Co. Was optimistic. It was just me, that flickering bulb, and 8 years of contacts who remembered what real work looked like. My first client was Tony Castellano, the same gruff manufacturer from Newark who'd given me my first big break 8 years earlier. He called 3 days after I'd set up shop. "Heard you left the family business," he said, his Brooklyn accent cutting through the static of my cheap desk phone. "Good. That brother of yours couldn't find his ass with both hands and a GPS. You interested in handling our digital overhaul?" 6 figures. Just like that. 1 phone call that proved something I'd been too afraid to test while I was bleeding for my family's approval. They weren't coming to Hall Digital Solutions for the name on the door. They were coming for me. The calls kept coming. Contractors who remembered my 3 a.m. responses to crisis emails. Small manufacturers who'd watched me personally debug their systems during holiday weekends. Regional chains who trusted me to handle launches that could make or break their quarterly numbers. Within 2 months, I had 12 employees crammed into that tiny space above the laundromat. We worked with the windows open because the heating system consisted of 2 space heaters that smelled like burning plastic, and conference calls happened with the constant background hum of washing machines and spin cycles 3 floors below. But we were building something real, something that belonged to us. Sarah Chen was my first hire, the graphic designer who'd followed me from the original company, walking away from a steady paycheck and full benefits to work for a woman operating out of a space that smelled like fabric softener and determination. "Why did you leave?" I asked her during her first week, watching her set up a workstation next to the window that overlooked a parking lot full of rusted Hondas and broken dreams. "Because you taught me that loyalty should flow both ways," she said, plugging in a monitor that was older than most of our clients' children. "And because I've seen what you can build when people actually appreciate what you're doing." By month 6, we'd outgrown the laundromat office and moved into actual commercial space in Long Island City. 3 floors, 60 employees, conference rooms with tables that didn't wobble when you leaned on them. The Forbes article came out in September 2020. Local women to watch. Lillian Hall's Phoenix Rising. The photographer made me pose in front of our logo, arms crossed, wearing the kind of confident smile that comes from knowing you've already survived the worst thing that could happen to you. The article mentioned my previous company exactly once. After leaving a family business to start her own firm, Hall has built Hall & Co. Solutions into one of the region's fastest-growing digital consultancies. I framed that article not because it mentioned me, but because it didn't mention them. In 800 words about my success, my family's betrayal had been reduced to 7 words after leaving a family business. That's when I understood the most satisfying form of revenge isn't destruction, it's irrelevance. While I was building something that mattered, Daniel was learning that inheriting a company and running one are 2 entirely different skill sets. The phone calls started in month 8, not to me directly, but to my employees, former employees, anyone who might carry messages back to the woman who'd walked away from everything she'd built. Hall Digital Solutions was hemorrhaging clients. Projects were stalling because Daniel didn't understand the difference between strategic vision and actual execution. The staff I'd trained was leaving for competitors who understood that good people don't stay where they're not valued. My assistant forwarded me a LinkedIn message from Marcus Williams, one of our former senior developers. "Lil, you need to see this. The place is falling apart. Half the team has quit, 2 major clients pulled their contracts, and Daniel just fired the entire customer service department because their numbers were down. It's a disaster." I deleted the message without responding. Their disaster wasn't my emergency anymore. The final confirmation came through industry gossip that travels faster than bad code through a rushed deployment. Hall Digital Solutions was up for sale. The family empire I'd built with my blood and sacrifice was being carved up and sold to the highest bidder because the heir apparent had confused entitlement with expertise. Sitting in my corner office overlooking the East River, watching the sunset paint Manhattan in shades of gold and possibility, I realized something that would have seemed impossible 2 years earlier. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger requires caring about the outcome. Revenge demands investment in someone else's failure. But watching my family's company crumble while my own success grew beyond anything I'd achieved working for them, that wasn't revenge. That was justice. They'd wanted Daniel to have the company I'd built? Fine. Let him have it. Let him learn what it actually takes to run a business when nobody's there to clean up his mistakes, answer his emails at 3 a.m., or sacrifice their sleep so he can take credit for their work. The empire I'd built for them was rotting in his inexperienced hands. But the empire I'd built for myself, that was just getting started. 3 years. That's how long it took for Daniel to completely destroy what I'd spent 8 years building. The news reached me on a Tuesday morning in March 2023, delivered through a text from my former assistant Maria. "You need to see this." Attached was a screenshot from the Long Island Business Journal, Hall Digital Solutions files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. I was sitting in my corner office at Hall & Co., reviewing quarterly reports that showed we'd just landed our biggest contract yet, a $5 million digital transformation for a regional hospital chain. My company was thriving, theirs was dying. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. The details emerged over the following weeks through industry whispers and LinkedIn updates that painted a picture of systematic failure. Daniel had alienated every major client I'd personally cultivated over 8 years of late-night crisis calls and weekend emergency fixes. The team I'd trained had scattered to competitors who understood their value. The company culture I'd built on mutual respect and shared sacrifice had been replaced by Daniel's vision of corporate hierarchy, which apparently involved a lot of expensive lunches and very little actual work. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from former employees. Screenshots of internal emails where Daniel blamed everyone except himself. Stories of contracts lost because he'd missed critical deadlines while attending networking events in the Hamptons. Photos of the empty office space that used to hum with the energy of people building something meaningful. But the message that hit deepest came from Tony Castellano, the gruff Newark manufacturer who'd given me my first big break. "Your brother just cost me 3 months of production delays and about 200 grand in lost revenue. Kid doesn't know the difference between a server and a sandwich. Thought you should know." Words getting around that the Hall name isn't what it used to be. The Hall name. The legacy Dad had always talked about protecting. The family reputation that was supposed to matter more than individual achievement or personal recognition. Daniel had managed to destroy in 3 years what it had taken our family 3 generations to build. The whispers started at industry events I attended, conferences where I was now invited as a keynote speaker instead of the woman working the registration table to save money on staffing costs. Competitors who'd once envied Hall Digital Solutions' client relationships now spoke about the company in past tense, like it was already a cautionary tale instead of ongoing business. It was never really Daniel's company anyway. I overheard at a networking mixer in Manhattan. Everyone knew his sister was the one who built that place. He just inherited her client list and drove it into the ground. The validation felt hollow. 3 years too late and delivered by people who'd stayed silent when their opinion might have actually mattered. The family dinner invitation came on a Friday evening in April, not a casual text or voicemail, but an actual handwritten note on Mom's personal stationery. The same cream-colored paper she used for condolence cards and formal thank you notes. The envelope was addressed in her careful cursive, Miss Lillian Hall, Chief Executive Officer, Hall & Co. Solutions. The formality was a tell. They were approaching me as a business contact now, not their daughter. Lillian, the note read, "Your father and I would like to invite you to dinner this Sunday. We have some family matters we'd like to discuss. Please let us know if 6 p.m. works with your schedule. Love, Mom." Family matters. Not we miss you or we made a mistake or even we're sorry. Family matters, like I was being summoned to handle someone else's crisis one more time. I almost threw the note away. Almost deleted the follow-up text from Dad's number. Really hope you can make it Sunday. Important we talk. But curiosity won over self-preservation. I needed to see their faces when they finally admitted what everyone else already knew, that they'd bet on the wrong horse and lost everything because of it. Sunday dinner at their house felt like visiting a museum of my former life. The same kitchen table where I'd calculated mortgage payments that kept their house out of foreclosure. The same living room where Dad had bragged to neighbors about his responsible daughter while planning to hand my life's work to his irresponsible son. They looked older, not just 3 years older, defeated older. Dad's shoulders curved inward like he was carrying weight he couldn't distribute. Mom's hands shook slightly as she served pot roasts that tasted like obligation and regret. Daniel wasn't there. He's dealing with some legal issues, Dad explained, not meeting my eyes. The bankruptcy lawyers, you know. We ate in silence for 20 minutes before Dad finally cleared his throat and delivered the words I'd been waiting 3 years to hear. We made a mistake. 4 syllables that contained 8 years of my sacrifice, 3 years of their consequences, and a lifetime of family dysfunction distilled into its purest form. The company's finished, he continued, his voice carrying the hollow tone of someone who'd run out of ways to avoid reality. Daniel, he didn't understand what you'd built. Couldn't maintain the relationships, couldn't deliver the work, couldn't keep the team together. Mom set down her fork with surgical precision. The clients are gone. The employees are gone. Even the building. We're going to lose the building. The building I'd designed. The conference room where they'd celebrated my professional execution. The offices where I'd worked 18-hour days to create something worth inheriting. All gone. But you, Dad said, looking directly at me for the first time since I'd arrived, you've built something incredible. We see the articles, the awards, the contracts. You've proven that you were always the one with the vision. The apology I'd imagined for 3 years finally arrived, delivered not as acknowledgement of wrong done, but as preamble to favor requested. Lillian, Mom said, her voice trembling with something that might have been shame or might have been desperation, we know we have no right to ask this, but the Hall name still means something in this industry. If you came back, if you merged your company with what's left of the original business. She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't actually speak the words that would complete their humiliation. So I spoke them for her. You want me to save you. The silence that followed was different from the earlier awkwardness. This was the silence of people who'd just had their deepest truth exposed, their most desperate need laid bare by the daughter they'd discarded when they thought they had better options. 3 years ago, I would have said yes. 3 years ago, I would have walked through fire to earn their approval, their recognition, their admission that I'd been valuable all along. But the woman sitting at that kitchen table wasn't the same person who'd walked out of their boardroom carrying a cardboard box and a dying plant. I was someone who'd learned the difference between being needed and being valued. Someone who'd discovered that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's building something so successful that their failure becomes irrelevant to your happiness. No, I said, my voice steady as bedrock. I'm not coming back to fix what you broke. For the first time in my life, I left my parents' house without cleaning up after dinner. Uncle Ray's 75th birthday party, same VFW hall we'd been renting for family celebrations since I was 12 years old. Same plastic tablecloths with the faded floral print, same folding chairs that squeaked when you leaned back, same cash bar serving beer warm and wine that tasted like it came from a box. Dad approached me first, moving with the careful steps of someone who'd learned that confidence was a luxury he could no longer afford. Lillian, you look. He paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound like the patronizing compliments he'd specialized in when I was bleeding for his approval. You look successful. Successful. Not proud, not accomplished. Successful. Like it was something that had happened to me rather than something I'd built with my own hands. I am successful, I replied, letting the word hang in recycled air that smelled like industrial carpet and other people's compromises. The party continued around us, Uncle Ray opening presents, cousins catching up on marriages and divorces and kids starting college. But I could feel the undercurrent of whispered conversations, sideways glances, the family trying to process the role reversal that no one had seen coming 4 years ago. Mom materialized beside Dad, her hands twisting a cocktail napkin into origami anxiety. Honey, could we talk to you privately? Just for a minute? The same tone she'd used when I was 16, and she needed to explain why Christmas presents would be lighter that year because Dad's gambling had gotten worse. The same voice that had asked me to take out loans for Daniel's education, to cover mortgage payments when they fell behind, to sacrifice my future for their immediate needs. They led me to the same back corner where family business had always been discussed, next to the coat rack and the broken air conditioning unit that hadn't worked since the Clinton administration. The bankruptcy is finalized, Dad said without preamble, his voice carrying the hollow echo of someone who'd run out of ways to avoid reality. We lost everything. The building, the client contracts, even the trademark. Everything you built is gone. Everything I built. After 4 years, he finally acknowledged whose hands had actually constructed what Daniel had inherited. But we see what you've accomplished, Mom added quickly, her words rushing together like she was afraid I'd walk away before she finished. Hall & Co. is everywhere now. The Forbes articles, the industry awards, those contracts with Fortune 500 companies. You've proven that you were always the one with the vision. Vision. The same word they'd used to justify handing my life's work to someone who couldn't distinguish between strategic planning and expensive lunch meetings. We made a terrible mistake, Dad continued, his admission delivered with the grudging tone of someone being forced to apologize by circumstances rather than conscience. We should have recognized your value from the beginning. Should have trusted your judgment instead of defaulting to traditional expectations. Traditional expectations. Even in apology, he couldn't quite say the words. We gave everything to Daniel because he was male and you were expendable. Please, Mom said, her voice breaking on the word like it physically hurt to speak. Help us. Help Daniel. Help the family. You're the only one who can fix this. The only one who can fix this. After 36 years of being the family's designated problem solver, crisis manager, and financial safety net, they were asking me to clean up one more mess. I reached into my purse, Italian leather, a gift to myself when we'd landed the healthcare contract that put Hall & Co. on the map, and pulled out a folder. Inside was a copy of the contract that had arrived by courier that morning. 47 pages of legal language that boiled down to one simple truth. My company had just been awarded a 5-year, $12 million digital transformation project with one of the largest retail chains in America. I placed the folder on the table between us, watching their eyes widen as they processed the numbers on the cover page. This is what I built after you gave Daniel my company, I said, my voice carrying the steady calm of someone who'd learned the difference between being needed and being valued. This contract is worth more than Hall Digital Solutions ever generated in its best year. This is mine, and no one can take it away from me. The silence that followed was different from the usual family awkwardness. This was the silence of people finally understanding the magnitude of what they'd thrown away, the scope of the success they'd never be part of. You gave away the company I built for 8 years, I continued, standing up and smoothing my suit jacket, a gesture that felt like armor against their desperation. My next move? It made you regret ever doubting me. I picked up the contract and slipped it back into my purse. But here's the thing you never understood about me. I didn't build Hall & Co. to prove anything to you. I built it because I finally learned to build something for myself. The party continued behind us, laughter and conversation, and the normal sounds of people celebrating life's milestones. But in our corner, next to the broken air conditioner and the coat rack holding jackets that cost less than my shoes, my parents stood frozen in the wreckage of their choices. I walked back through the VFW hall, past relatives who watched my exit, with expressions ranging from admiration to envy to something that might have been pride if it had arrived 4 years earlier. Daniel remained at his corner table, staring into a beer that had gone warm while his inheritance had gone bankrupt. The parking lot was lit by streetlights that cast everything in harsh white light and deep black shadows. My car, a BMW I'd bought with my first major contract as CEO, reflected the glow like polished obsidian. I started the engine, backed out of the parking space, and drove toward the city where my company occupied 3 floors of a glass tower that reflected ambition instead of desperation. In my rearview mirror, the VFW hall grew smaller until it disappeared entirely, taking with it the last remnants of the woman who'd once believed that family loyalty required self-destruction. The empire I'd built belonged entirely to me, and for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. If Lillian's story hit you in the chest, if you've ever been the one sacrificing everything while someone else got the credit, if you've ever walked away from toxic family dynamics to build something better, this story was for you. Hit that like button if you've ever been underestimated by the people who should have supported you most. Subscribe and ring that notification bell because next week, we're sharing the story of Marcus, a man who worked 15 years to build his father-in-law's restaurant empire, only to watch it get handed to his wife's lazy brother. His comeback will make you believe in karma again. Drop a comment below and tell me. Have you ever had to choose between being used and being free? What was the moment you realized your loyalty was one-sided? Share your story, because every time someone speaks their truth about toxic family dynamics, it gives someone else permission to stop accepting what they don't deserve. Remember, Lillian spent 8 years building someone else's empire, but the empire she built for herself, that's the one that lasted. That's the one that mattered. That's the one that was truly hers.